Tonight's journey begins in quiet places. Long before glowing cities stretched across the horizon, before highways crossed mountains and aircraft traced invisible paths through the sky, people watched darkness arrive in a different way. Evening came softly across rivers and forests. It settled over villages and coastlines. It drifted across deserts and snowfields. Lamps grew brighter as stars slowly appeared. And in those quieter hours, people often wondered about mysteries that seemed larger at night. They wondered where dreams came from. They wondered whether unseen worlds might exist just beyond ordinary sight. And perhaps more than anything else, they wondered what happened after the final journey of life itself. Because throughout human history, across mountains and oceans and generations separated by thousands of years, people imagined that death was not always an ending. Sometimes it was described as a beginning. Sometimes it was a crossing. Sometimes it was a road. Ancient stories spoke of rivers traveled beneath moonlight, distant lands beyond hidden horizons, star-filled pathways stretching across the sky, and quiet guides waiting beside mysterious thresholds. Souls crossed bridges. They sailed upon celestial waters. They walked mountain roads. They followed birds, ferrymen, spirits, and stars. And perhaps what is most remarkable is how often people, separated by immense distances, imagined similar journeys. A village beside the Nile imagined sacred boats crossing darkness. Communities beside northern seas imagined spirit roads beneath winter skies. Families gathered beneath African stars imagined ancestors remaining close. Across coastlines and forests and grasslands, many stories arrived at a surprisingly familiar idea. No traveler walks entirely alone. Welcome to the Sleepy Legends channel. Tonight, we travel through myths and legends that imagine the oldest journey of all. We will wander beside rivers of memory and roads beneath stars. We will visit moonlit shores, ancient mountains, and quiet landscapes where stories suggested the boundaries between worlds might become very thin indeed. If stories of mystery and mythology have become part of your evenings, welcome back. And if tonight is your first journey with us here on the Sleepy Legends channel, then we invite you to settle beside the campfire as our path begins. Far away, beneath ancient Egyptian skies, another journey is already waiting. The Nile moved through the darkness with steady purpose. Even at night, its waters reflected stars, carrying faint silver light across reeds and riverbanks. For ancient Egyptians, rivers represented more than movement across landscapes. Water connected worlds. And above the Nile, another river seemed to exist. The sky itself. To ancient Egyptians, the heavens could resemble celestial waters, and every evening a remarkable journey began. The sun did not simply disappear. It traveled. As daylight faded, the great solar god Ra entered his sacred boat and began moving through the underworld. Night was not empty darkness. It became a voyage. Ancient Egyptian texts describe this journey as long and uncertain. During the night, Ra crossed 12 regions before dawn returned once more. 12 regions, 12 gates. Each hour brought new landscapes and challenges. Some regions contained strange beings. Others held guardians and spirits. Serpents waited in darkness. Powerful forces threatened order itself. And perhaps listeners in ancient Egypt looked toward the stars and imagined those distant lights reflecting roads hidden beyond ordinary sight. Egyptians also believed human souls traveled after death. Their understanding of the soul itself contained many parts and qualities. Identity extended beyond a single idea. The journey required preparation. Tombs contained supplies. Words mattered. Knowledge mattered. Spells and sacred writings became guides for travelers entering unfamiliar landscapes. Today, many people know these writings through a familiar modern name, the Book of the Dead. Yet ancient Egyptians viewed these texts less as stories and more as assistants, a collection of guidance intended to help travelers continue safely. And perhaps there is something very human inside that idea. Whenever people prepare for journeys, they create maps. They ask for directions. They hope someone has traveled there before. Night journeys continued beneath the stars, and somewhere beyond Egypt, other travelers waited beside another kind of water. Not a river beneath warm skies, a darker shore, a quieter crossing. Beyond each gate, ancient Egyptians imagined landscapes unlike ordinary places. Night itself became a realm filled with mystery, movement, and careful passage. The underworld was not always a place of stillness. In many stories, it was active and changing, a world where travelers continued onward. Ancient texts sometimes describe the journey through 12 regions, each connected with a different hour of the night. As darkness moved slowly toward dawn, the sacred voyage continued through these unseen territories. Time itself seemed to become part of the landscape. Hour by hour, gate by gate, journey by journey. Some places held guardian beings whose names and identities carried importance. Knowledge mattered deeply in Egyptian tradition. To know a name could mean understanding something essential. Travelers were not simply drifting through darkness. They moved with intention. And perhaps there was comfort in that idea. Imagine ancient families standing beneath warm night skies beside the Nile, looking upward toward stars reflected in dark waters. Perhaps they wondered whether loved ones who had departed had also entered another journey filled with landmarks and recognizable passages. Because familiar roads are reassuring, even mysterious roads. For Egyptians, preparation for this journey mattered greatly. Tombs became more than resting places. They were equipped carefully and thoughtfully. Objects traveled with the departed. Food, belongings, symbols, and writings accompanied those continuing onward. This was not preparation for an ending. It was preparation for travel. Ancient Egyptian beliefs about the soul itself were remarkably detailed. Rather than imagining a single simple spirit, they described several aspects of a person's existence. Different qualities represented personality, vitality, identity, and spiritual presence. The journey after death involved preserving harmony among these parts. Life and order held deep importance in Egyptian thought. Balance mattered. Harmony mattered. The word Ma'at represented ideas of truth, order, and cosmic balance. Maintaining harmony within the universe was considered essential. Even the movement of stars and seasons reflected larger patterns. And journeys through the underworld unfolded inside that same cosmic order. Eventually, many travelers reached one of the most famous scenes in Egyptian mythology, the weighing of the heart. This image has survived for thousands of years and still captures imagination today. Ancient stories describe the heart being weighed against the feather of Ma'at. The heart represented more than an organ. Egyptians viewed it as connected with memory, action, and identity. Nearby stood powerful beings associated with judgment and guidance. Among them appeared the jackal-headed god Anubis, a figure often connected with tombs and safe passage. Rather than appearing only as a frightening figure, Anubis frequently acted as a guide and protector. And across many cultures, guides appear again and again. Some arrive as ferrymen, some arrive as birds, some arrive as ancestors. Many arrive simply to accompany travelers into unfamiliar places. Perhaps ancient people understood something timeless. Long journeys become easier when someone walks beside you. Egyptian stories also describe dangers during the night voyage. Among the greatest threats stood the serpent Apophis, a force associated with chaos and disorder. During Ross' nightly journey, great struggles unfolded to preserve the return of dawn. Night could feel uncertain, darkness could feel immense, yet morning returned, always. Perhaps this became one of the most hopeful ideas within Egyptian mythology. Each sunrise represented renewal. Each dawn reflected successful passage through darkness. The sun emerged again. Light returned to the Nile. Birds crossed the morning sky. And life continued. Across thousands of years, generations witnessed that same pattern repeating. Evening arrived. Darkness traveled across the land. Morning followed. For people living beside the Nile, perhaps the cycle itself suggested an important truth. Journeys continue. Endings become beginnings. And beyond Egypt, far beyond warm rivers and desert horizons, others also imagine souls waiting beside water. Different waters now waited. Colder waters, mist-covered waters. Ahead, distant shores slowly appeared beneath ancient Greek skies. The waters here felt different. The warm reeds and broad riverbanks of Egypt seemed far away now. Moonlight rested upon darker currents, and pale mist drifted slowly across silent shores. Ancient Greece imagined the journey of souls through landscapes shaped by rivers, boundaries, and crossings. And like many places in mythology, reaching another world often began beside water. For many people today, one river immediately comes to mind: the river Styx. Its name has echoed through stories for centuries, yet ancient Greek traditions imagined more than a single river flowing through the lands of the dead. Several waterways appeared in myths, each carrying meanings and associations of its own. There was the Styx, often linked with sacred oaths and boundaries. There was Acheron, sometimes called the River of Sorrow. There was Lethe, associated with forgetfulness. Other rivers entered stories as well, creating a landscape where memory, grief, and passage all flowed together. Rivers became more than geography. They became ideas. And perhaps listeners long ago understood rivers in a deeply personal way. Rivers separate places. Rivers connect places. Rivers mark endings and beginnings. Standing beside moving water can create unusual thoughts. One shore remains behind while another waits ahead. Ancient Greek storytellers seemed fascinated by that feeling. Many myths describe souls arriving beside shadowed shores after death, where another figure waited nearby. A ferryman named Charon guided travelers across the waters. His appearance has survived for thousands of years. A small boat, dark water, a quiet crossing. Stories often describe travelers carrying a coin intended as payment for passage. Burial customs sometimes included placing coins with the departed, preparing them for journeys ahead. Again and again, preparation appears within mythology. Travelers gather supplies. Maps matter. Guides matter. Across distant cultures, people imagined similar needs. And perhaps there was comfort in believing journeys continued with familiar customs and recognizable rituals. The crossing itself was important. Greek mythology often treated boundaries with special significance. Shorelines, crossroads, gates, and thresholds appeared repeatedly throughout stories. Places between worlds carried mystery, neither here nor there. Ancient listeners may have found those in-between places especially powerful. Misty harbors at dawn, mountain passes hidden in cloud, quiet roads disappearing into forests. Some places naturally feel suspended between destinations. Perhaps that explains why mythology returned there so often. Beyond the rivers, stories described further landscapes unfolding across the underworld. Travelers did not simply arrive at a single destination. Journeys continued. Some traditions describe judges waiting farther ahead. Mythological figures such as Minos and Rhadamanthus sometimes appeared in later stories connected with judgment and decisions concerning souls. There is something quietly haunting in that image. Countless souls gathered beside dark waters, waiting, watching the river drift endlessly onward. Ancient people often feared not merely death itself, but the possibility of becoming stranded between destinations. To remain caught at a threshold was its own kind of uncertainty. And thresholds in mythology rarely permit endless waiting. Eventually, crossings occur. Journeys continue. Near the gate stood Cerberus. The great hound of the underworld is often remembered as a creature with 3 heads, though ancient descriptions sometimes varied. Some storytellers gave him serpents for a tail. Others imagined snakes woven among his fur. Greek myths frequently changed details across generations. Yet one thing remained consistent. Cerberus guarded the threshold. His purpose was not simply to keep intruders out. He also kept souls in. This detail reveals something interesting about Greek thought. The underworld was not merely a prison to enter. It was a place of permanence. Crossing into Hades represented a journey that generally moved in one direction. The threshold mattered because returning was rare, though not impossible. Among the most famous travelers to cross these boundaries was Orpheus. His story began not with conquest or warfare, but with grief. Orpheus, gifted with music so beautiful that even nature paused to listen, lost his wife Eurydice after her sudden death. Unable to accept her loss, he traveled toward the underworld itself. And so one of mythology's most famous journeys began. Not into treasure chambers, not into distant kingdoms, but toward a gate beneath the earth. Ancient stories say his music softened hearts that normally remained untouched. As Orpheus traveled through the underworld, his songs moved spirits, guardians, and rulers alike. Even Cerberus grew quiet. Even stone seemed to listen. At last Orpheus stood before the rulers of the dead and pleaded for Eurydice's return. Permission was granted, but under one condition. He must not look behind him until both had fully returned to the world above. And as the old stories tell us, near the very threshold between worlds, uncertainty entered. He looked back, and the doorway closed once more. Perhaps that is why stories of thresholds endure, because standing at boundaries has always carried uncertainty. The Greeks imagined gates beneath mountains and rivers beneath stone because they understood something familiar. Moments of crossing often feel powerful. Sometimes they feel hopeful. Sometimes they feel frightening. Because once a threshold has been crossed, the world on the other side is rarely exactly the same as the world left behind. And somewhere beneath ancient mountains, beneath roots and rivers and forgotten roads, the old stories imagine gates still standing in silence, waiting beneath the earth. The waters slowly disappeared behind us. Mist-covered shores faded into darkness, and somewhere far away the oars of ancient ferrymen drifted into silence. Ahead, the world felt different now. The air seemed colder, and the stars looked sharper here, brighter against enormous skies. The journey north had begun. Far above distant forests, winter constellations stretched across darkness. Snow-covered mountains and valleys. Pine trees stood beneath moonlight while cold winds crossed empty landscapes and carried sounds farther than expected. Northern places often feel larger at night. The land becomes quieter. Distances seem to grow, and familiar roads disappear beneath snow and shadow. Even today, winter landscapes can feel strangely transformed after sunset. And perhaps for people living in the far north, journeys through mythology naturally became journeys through winter landscapes. Ancient Norse traditions imagined a universe filled with movement. Their stories describe gods traveling enormous distances, messengers crossing between worlds, heroes wandering unfamiliar roads, and unseen pathways connecting places beyond ordinary reach. Movement mattered. Journeys mattered. Paths between places mattered. And perhaps that is one reason stories of the soul also became stories of travel. If the universe itself seemed connected by roads and hidden passages, then the final journey of life may have seemed like another path continuing into unfamiliar territory. Not an ending perhaps, but another road beneath another sky. Today, many people hear Norse mythology and immediately think of dramatic battles, warriors, and magnificent halls. Images of longships and shields often appear first in the imagination. Yet ideas surrounding death and the soul's journey were often quieter and more varied than modern storytelling sometimes suggests. Because not every road led toward glory, and not every traveler followed the same path. Many modern retellings focus heavily on Valhalla, the great hall associated with Odin and heroic warriors. It has become one of the most recognizable destinations in Norse mythology, a place of feasts and stories and gatherings beyond life. Yet ancient traditions imagined many roads. Some souls traveled elsewhere. Some reached different destinations. Some followed quieter paths. One of those destinations was hell, because hell in Norse mythology carried meanings very different from later ideas attached to similar words. Hell was both a realm and a figure associated with the daughter of Loki, and for many people it represented another destination among several possibilities. Not punishment, not reward, simply another place. And perhaps that surprises many modern listeners. Later traditions often divided afterlife landscapes into simple categories. One destination represented goodness, while another represented suffering. Yet many older mythologies felt more like maps, filled with roads and regions and landscapes shaped by different journeys. Ancient listeners may have imagined the soul traveling through places as complex and varied as life itself. The journey toward hell also included another image that appears again and again throughout world mythology: a bridge. Stories described a bridge known as Yalarbru stretching across waters between realms. A guardian named Madka watched over the crossing and asked questions of travelers moving along the road. Again, the pattern appears: crossings, guardians, questions. Ancient cultures separated by oceans and centuries often imagined similar structures surrounding journeys after death. Gates appear, rivers appear, roads appear, someone waits nearby. And perhaps there is something deeply human hidden inside that pattern. When people imagine entering unfamiliar places, they often imagine boundaries. Someone stands nearby. Someone asks where travelers are going. Someone watches the road ahead. Crossing a bridge changes things. One step still belongs to the old world. Another step belongs somewhere new and somewhere unseen. Travelers crossing mountains or borders know this feeling well. Perhaps myth remembered it too. Ancient northern landscapes may have shaped many of these stories. Winter itself transforms ordinary places. Roads disappear beneath snow, rivers freeze beneath ice, and mountains become uncertain beneath storms and darkness. Travel changes. Everything changes. Moonlight across snow can feel remarkably otherworldly. Winter silence creates unusual experiences, and sounds travel farther across frozen landscapes than expected. Even now, footsteps seem louder. Forests seem stiller. Distant lights shimmer against darkness in ways that feel almost dreamlike. And in northern regions, another light sometimes appears overhead. High above the world, curtains of color drift slowly across the night sky. Green light moves across darkness. Silver waves appear and vanish. Shapes change and shift above mountains and forests. Today we call them the Northern Lights, the aurora. But long before scientific explanations existed, people imagined stories. And perhaps that feels understandable. Imagine standing beneath winter stars thousands of years ago while enormous rivers of light drifted silently across the sky. Imagine watching colors move above dark mountains while snow reflected moonlight across the earth below. It would feel mysterious. It would feel enormous. It would feel like a pathway. Across northern lands, many traditions connected unusual sky phenomena with spirits, ancestors, and unseen worlds. Because in many cultures, the sky itself became more than scenery. It became part of the journey. Norse stories also gave importance to another companion of travelers, the horse. Again and again, horses carried heroes, gods, and messengers across impossible distances. They crossed landscapes that ordinary travelers could never reach and moved between places where boundaries seemed uncertain. And perhaps no horse became more famous than Sleipnir. Stories described Odin's remarkable eight-legged horse moving between worlds themselves. Distances that seemed impossible became passable, and roads that ordinary travelers could never find suddenly became visible. Worlds connected, roads continued, journeys never entirely ended. Ancient burial customs also reflected these ideas of movement and travel. Ships appeared repeatedly throughout Norse culture, and some individuals were buried with ships or symbols connected with voyages. Again, movement appears. Again, travel appears. Even after life ended, symbols of journeys remain nearby, because ships carry people beyond horizons, and horizons have always inspired imagination. Stand beside an ocean long enough and questions naturally appear. What waits beyond sight? Who travels there? What lies farther ahead? Perhaps people living beside northern seas wondered the same things beneath stars and moonlight. The horizon itself can feel like a threshold, neither here nor there. And throughout Norse stories, another image quietly connected everything together. The world tree, Yggdrasil. Stories described an immense tree stretching across existence itself. Its branches reached upward, roots reached downward, and realms existed throughout its vast structure. Everything connected. Everything belonged somewhere. Roads joined worlds. Roots joined worlds. Branches joined worlds, and travelers moved continually among them. Perhaps there was comfort in that idea. Ancient people often imagined the universe not as scattered places, but as connected places. As night deepened over northern forests, stars continued their slow movement overhead. Snow reflected moonlight across hills and valleys, while distant winds crossed mountains and disappeared among dark trees. And perhaps listeners sitting beside ancient fires imagined unseen travelers moving quietly through those landscapes, crossing bridges and following hidden roads beneath winter skies. Because far north, beneath wandering lights and cold stars, stories suggested that even in darkness, paths still remained. The northern forest slowly faded behind us. Snow-covered valleys and winter skies drifted into memory, while distant mountains disappeared into darkness. The journey continued onward, and after roads of ice and stars, another landscape slowly emerged beneath the night. The air felt softer here. Moonlight rested upon quiet hills and distant mountains, while lantern light glowed beside winding pathways. Temple bells carried gentle sounds across evening air, and mist gathered between trees where shadows moved beneath the sky. Once again, water waited ahead. Throughout mythology, rivers appear again and again, almost like familiar companions appearing along ancient roads. Rivers separate places, rivers connect places, and rivers create boundaries that feel ordinary during daylight, but strangely mysterious after sunset. Stand beside a river long enough, and unusual thoughts sometimes arrive. Water moves onward. Reflections shift. The surface changes from moment to moment, while the river itself somehow remains. Ancient people noticed such things, and perhaps that is why rivers so often became companions of myth. In Japanese tradition, stories spoke of another crossing place called the Sanzu River. Like several rivers appearing across world mythology, It represented a boundary between the world of the living and the world waiting beyond ordinary sight. Another shore waited ahead, another crossing, another journey. Yet the Sanzu River carried details that felt uniquely its own. Stories surrounding the river gradually developed through Buddhist influence and Japanese tradition, weaving together ideas of travel, memory, consequence, and passage into landscapes that felt deeply human. As with many ancient stories, the journey itself mattered as much as the destination waiting ahead. Travelers arriving at the Sanzu River sometimes discovered that not every crossing looked the same, and not every traveler followed an identical path. Some crossed by bridges, some crossed shallow waters, others faced more difficult passages. Again, a familiar pattern appears across mythology. Roads change from traveler to traveler, and journeys unfold differently depending upon the path someone walks. Perhaps people everywhere understood this naturally. No two lives are identical. No two journeys feel exactly alike. Ancient listeners may have imagined moonlit shores where travelers gathered quietly beside dark water. Lanterns may have flickered nearby while distant hills rose beneath stars and mist drifted across the landscape. There is a particular quietness beside rivers at night. Not silence exactly, something softer. Water speaks in small sounds. Wind moves gently through trees, and branches shift overhead while the world feels suspended somewhere between movement and stillness. Even now, rivers at night often create that feeling. Perhaps that is one reason they became places of myth. Stories connected with the Sanzu River sometimes included another image that feels remarkably human. Travelers carried burdens, not heavy satchels perhaps, but invisible burdens shaped by memory, choices, and experience. Journeys reflected what travelers carried, and perhaps listeners long ago immediately understood that idea, because everyone carries things. Memories travel with people. Kindness travels with people too. Regret sometimes travels beside them as well. Some things become lighter over time while others remain. Ancient stories often transformed invisible experiences into landscapes and roads, because stories can sometimes give shape to things difficult to describe directly. And night journeys often become places where reflection quietly appears. Throughout many traditions, crossing places became moments of pause and understanding. Travelers stop for a while. Travelers remember where they have been and wonder where they may be going next. Even ordinary journeys can feel this way. Long roads beneath stars, train windows reflecting distant lights, ships moving across dark water, mountain roads after sunset. Travel itself creates reflection, and perhaps mythology understood that long ago. Stories surrounding the Sanzu River also became connected with children in especially moving ways. Certain traditions describe children gathering stones beside riverbanks and carefully building small towers one stone at a time. Stone upon stone, carefully placed, quietly gathered. Stories said these towers did not always remain standing. Again and again they fell, and again they were rebuilt beside the river. And nearby another figure often appeared, Jizo. In Japanese tradition, Jizo became associated with protection and guidance, especially for children and travelers. Images of Jizo often appear beside roads, pathways, and places connected with journeys. Across cultures, guides appear repeatedly. Some carry lanterns, some carry staffs, some simply arrive and remain nearby. Perhaps there is comfort in that recurring image because long journeys often seem less uncertain when someone accompanies the road ahead. Ancient stories understood something simple and timeless. Travel feels different when someone walks beside you. Japanese traditions also often imagined continuing connections between ancestors and the living world. Rather than disappearing entirely into distant places, ancestors sometimes remained close through memory, ritual, and seasonal return. The boundary itself could become thinner. Not gone, simply thinner. And lights often played important roles within these traditions. Lantern festivals and seasonal observances welcomed returning spirits, creating landscapes filled with small glowing lights beneath evening skies. Imagine villages beneath summer stars. Imagine lanterns drifting slowly across rivers while families gather beside water and distant mountains stand quietly beneath moonlight. Even now it feels dreamlike. Across cultures, people repeatedly use light to guide travelers. Fires appeared beside roads, lanterns glowed outside homes, and candles illuminated pathways through darkness. Because light changes journeys. A single light in the distance can transform an entire landscape after sunset. Travelers know this. Sailors know this too. Ancient storytellers understood it as well. Mountains also carried importance throughout Japanese landscapes and spiritual traditions. Mountains rise between worlds in many mythologies because they seem to stand between earth and sky, between villages and clouds, between ordinary places and unknown places. Paths climb upward while mist gathers around stone trails and forests. Travelers ascend slowly and discover horizons waiting beyond the next ridge. The world changes. The journey changes. Everything feels farther away. And perhaps mountains naturally inspire imagination because they already feel connected with mystery. Travelers climb mountains and discover landscapes they could not see before. Journeys continue, always continue. As night deepened around the Sanzu River, water reflected moonlight across slow-moving currents while lanterns glowed softly beside distant paths. Mist gathered among hills and trees while travelers quietly continued arriving along unseen roads. Some crossed bridges while others crossed water. Some followed easier paths, while others wandered more difficult roads beneath the night sky. And somewhere farther ahead, beyond rivers and lanterns and mountain shadows, another journey waited beneath stars. Because above the world itself, people once imagined roads not made of stone or earth or water. Roads made of light. The riverbanks slowly disappeared behind us. Lantern light faded into the distance while mountain silhouettes softened beneath gathering night. The paths beside the Sanzu River drifted away, and for a while it seemed as though the journey itself had become lighter. No road stretched ahead now, no bridges, no distant ferrymen waiting beside the shore. Instead, the path slowly lifted upward. Across countless generations, people looked toward the night sky and imagined more than stars. They saw rivers suspended above the earth, pathways stretching through darkness, and luminous roads connecting places hidden beyond ordinary sight. Because long before maps charted oceans and mountains, people already searched for direction overhead. The sky itself became a guide. It guided travelers crossing deserts. It guided sailors moving across dark waters. It guided people journeying across grasslands and forests beneath unfamiliar skies. And perhaps after watching stars night after night, generation after generation, people naturally began imagining that souls might travel there too. Because some roads feel too beautiful to belong only to the living world. One celestial path appeared above nearly everyone: the Milky Way. Across modern cities, it can sometimes be difficult to see, softened by distant lights and glowing horizons. But for most of human history, the night sky looked very different. Much darker, much larger, much more crowded with stars. Imagine standing far from cities beneath a moonless sky thousands of years ago. Mountains surround the horizon. Oceans move quietly nearby. Forests stand in darkness, while overhead an enormous river of light stretches from one horizon to another. Not a handful of stars, thousands, perhaps even more. Ancient people across the world looked upward and imagined stories, because it is difficult not to imagine stories when standing beneath a sky like that. The Milky Way became many things: a celestial river, a pathway of spirits, a road for souls, a trail left by animals or gods. Cultures separated by enormous distances often looked upward and arrived at surprisingly similar ideas. Again and again, people imagined movement overhead. Roads appeared, journeys appeared, travel continued. Among many traditions, the stars themselves became destinations connected with ancestors and spirits. Some stories imagined departed souls rising upward, joining celestial landscapes beyond ordinary sight. Others imagined roads hidden among the stars. Still others imagined ancestors becoming part of the heavens themselves. And perhaps there is something comforting in that thought. Because stars return. Night after night they return. Season after season they return. People disappear. Generations pass. Villages change. Yet the stars continue crossing familiar paths overhead. Perhaps ancient listeners found reassurance in that rhythm. The sky remembers. Many indigenous traditions across the world imagine powerful connections between ancestors and celestial pathways. In some stories, the Milky Way became a spirit road stretching across darkness. In others, it became a trail traveled by souls moving between worlds. And perhaps roads in the sky felt natural because roads on Earth already led people toward unknown places. Stand beside a distant road at night, and eventually it disappears into darkness. Stand beneath the stars and the same thing happens. The farther a path travels, the more mysterious it becomes. Far north beneath enormous skies, people sometimes watched lights drifting overhead while stars reflected across rivers and snowfields. Along coastlines and villages where winter nights stretched long into darkness, stories sometimes imagine worlds existing very near the ordinary one. Not far away, just nearby, just beyond sight. Across Alaska and northern regions, many indigenous traditions connected stories deeply with landscape. Mountains mattered, animals mattered, rivers mattered, and the sky itself often carried meaning that felt alive and immediate. Not scenery, part of the story, because landscapes become companions when people live closely beside them. Ancient people living beneath wide northern skies watched stars move season after season. They observed patterns. They watched familiar lights return. And perhaps after enough years passed, the sky itself began feeling like a memory, like a place, like a road. Elsewhere across grasslands and beneath vast African skies, stars also carried stories and meaning. Far from city lights, night skies stretched across the horizon with extraordinary clarity. People gathered beside fires while distant constellations slowly crossed overhead. And perhaps beneath enormous skies, questions naturally appeared. Who traveled there? Who watched from above? Who continued beyond the horizon? Among many traditions, ancestors remained active presences rather than distant memories. They guided, observed, and remained connected with those still living. Separation did not always mean disappearance. Again and again this idea appears. Journeys continue, connections continue, roads continue, and perhaps that recurring idea tells us something about people themselves. Ancient stories often refuse to imagine separation as permanent. Instead, they imagine pathways remaining open, even if hidden from ordinary sight. Birds sometimes became part of these stories as well. Throughout many cultures, birds moved between earth and sky in ways that seemed mysterious. Ravens crossed winter landscapes. Eagles climbed into enormous heights. Owls appeared silently after sunset. Birds travel roads people cannot follow, and perhaps that made them feel like companions of myth. Some traditions imagine birds carrying messages. Others imagine birds accompanying souls or guiding journeys. Again, movement appears. Again, travelers appear. Again, roads continue. And perhaps there is a reason these images return so often. People have always watched movement with curiosity. Rivers move, clouds move, stars move. Birds disappear beyond horizons and return later from distant places unseen by ordinary travelers. Movement invites imagination, especially at night. As the journey continued upward, the earth below slowly seemed farther away. Rivers became silver lines crossing darkness. Mountains softened beneath moonlight while forests disappeared into shadow. Overhead, the stars stretched endlessly. Roads of light crossed the heavens. And perhaps ancient people standing beneath such skies imagined unseen travelers moving there, quietly following celestial pathways from one horizon to another. Because once people began imagining roads among the stars, the sky itself no longer felt empty. It became another landscape, another destination, another journey. And somewhere farther ahead, beyond rivers of stars and celestial roads of light, other travelers waited nearby. Because no journey, no matter how mysterious, is always traveled alone. The celestial roads slowly faded behind us. Rivers of stars stretched farther away with every step, while the Milky Way slowly dissolved into the larger darkness surrounding it. Overhead, constellations continued their patient movement across the sky, but ahead another thought quietly emerged. If journeys exist, perhaps travelers are not the only ones who matter. Perhaps companions matter too. Because roads can feel very different when someone walks beside them. Across mythology, one idea appears with remarkable consistency. Ancient cultures separated by oceans, mountains, and thousands of years often imagined that souls did not travel entirely alone. Someone waited nearby. Someone guided the road ahead. Someone knew the path. And perhaps that is one of the gentlest ideas hidden inside mythology's oldest journeys. Rivers may feel mysterious, mountains may feel uncertain, and unseen roads may disappear into darkness, but again and again stories suggested that travelers rarely walked forward without assistance. Some guides arrived carrying lanterns. Some appeared beside rivers. Some stood waiting near gates. Others arrived with wings or paws or feathers. And perhaps what is remarkable is not how different these guides appear. It is how familiar they feel, because almost every traveler understands the relief of finding someone who knows the road. Imagine arriving somewhere unfamiliar after nightfall. The roads are uncertain. Mountains stand dark against the horizon. Strange sounds move through forests while distant lights shimmer beneath gathering mist. Then someone appears, not to judge, not to threaten, simply to guide. Ancient stories often treated these figures with special importance. Today, people sometimes use a word with ancient roots to describe them. Psychopomps. The word may sound unusual at first, yet its meaning is surprisingly simple. It refers to beings associated with guiding souls from one place to another. Guides of travelers, companions of journeys, keepers of roads. And once we notice them, they begin appearing everywhere. In ancient Egypt, travelers encountered figures associated with protection and safe passage. Earlier in our journey, we visited the jackal-headed figure Anubis, who became associated with tombs and guidance through uncertain territory. Nearby stood roads. Nearby stood thresholds. Nearby stood journeys continuing onward. Across ancient Greece, another guide waited beside dark waters. Charon ferried souls across rivers and through landscapes hidden beyond ordinary sight. Though stories sometimes portrayed him as stern and mysterious, his role remained remarkably practical. He knew the crossing. He knew the route. He knew where the river led. And perhaps that itself carried reassurance, because travelers often worry less when someone nearby has made the journey before. Far north in Norse traditions, roads crossed bridges and winter landscapes while figures watched crossings between realms. Travelers moving through unfamiliar territories often encountered guardians and companions standing near important boundaries. Again, roads appear. Again, guides appear. Again, journeys continue. Patterns quietly emerge. Across Japanese traditions, figures such as Jizo became associated with travelers and protection. Images appeared beside roads and pathways, quietly suggesting that no traveler moved entirely without companionship. Even stone statues beside roads can create strange feelings. Someone waits, someone watches, someone remains nearby. And perhaps ancient people understood that roads themselves sometimes feel less lonely when a companion stands nearby. But not every guide in mythology appeared in human form. Animals arrived too, again and again. Across many traditions, animals occupied unusual spaces between ordinary and mysterious worlds. They moved through forests unseen. They traveled across mountains and rivers. They disappeared into places people could not easily follow. And perhaps because of that, Animals often became companions of mythic journeys. Birds frequently appeared as messengers and guides. Ravens crossed winter skies. Owls traveled silently through darkness. Eagles climbed enormous heights and vanished among clouds. Birds understand roads in the sky. People watch them disappear beyond horizons and later return, and perhaps such movements naturally inspired stories. Dogs appeared too, surprisingly often. Across world mythology, dogs repeatedly appeared near gates, crossings, and boundaries between worlds. Sometimes they guarded roads. Sometimes they protected travelers. Sometimes they stood watch near places where one journey ended and another began. Perhaps this seems unusual at first, until we remember something simple. Dogs have walked beside people for a very long time. Long roads, long winters, long journeys. Companionship itself becomes part of travel. And perhaps ancient stories reflected that experience, because faithful companions remain powerful figures in memory. Far north, beneath winter skies and northern lights, stories sometimes imagine ravens crossing landscapes of snow and sea. Along coastlines and villages where darkness stretched across long seasons, birds and animals often carried meanings woven deeply into stories and identity. Across Alaska and northern indigenous traditions, animals frequently occupied important spaces within storytelling. Raven stories in particular carried roles that shifted between creator, guide, traveler, and companion depending upon tradition and place. Again, movement appears. Again, guidance appears. Again, journeys continue. Not as repetition perhaps, but as recognition. Because people living far apart often notice similar things. Elsewhere beneath African skies, stories also imagine relationships between ancestors, guides, and unseen companionship. Travelers crossing enormous landscapes often depended upon memory, stars, and trusted companions. Roads teach certain lessons. Travelers remember who walked beside them. Ancient myths may have remembered that too. And perhaps there is another reason guides appear so often within stories of the soul. Journeys can feel uncertain. Not only mythic journeys, ordinary journeys too. Moving somewhere unfamiliar, leaving something behind, standing at the beginning of a road while wondering what waits farther ahead. People understand such moments. Everyone does. And perhaps stories offered companionship where uncertainty existed. Someone waits nearby. Someone knows the road. Someone walks beside you. The idea itself feels ancient. As night deepened around our journey, distant roads stretched quietly beneath stars. Mountains rested beneath moonlight while rivers reflected silver light across their surfaces. Somewhere beyond forests and coastlines and unseen horizons, travelers continued moving forward. Not alone, never entirely alone. Because across mythology, whether companions arrived with wings or lanterns, or pause or quiet footsteps beside the road, stories often suggested the same gentle truth. Long journeys become easier when someone walks beside them, and somewhere farther ahead, Beyond guides and companions and roads hidden beneath stars, another destination slowly waited. Because some journeys do not only carry travelers away, sometimes they bring them back home again. The companions of the journey slowly faded into the distance. Ferrymen disappeared into mist while lantern bearers and celestial guides continued onward along unseen roads. Yet even after they vanished, the feeling of companionship somehow remained, because people rarely remember journeys only by their destinations. They remember landscapes. They remember mountains. They remember bridges crossed at night. And perhaps ancient storytellers understood that roads themselves sometimes become characters in a journey. Ahead, another landscape slowly emerged. Mist gathered between mountain ridges while distant peaks rose beneath stars. Stone pathways climbed into darkness, and far below a river moved quietly through the valley. Somewhere ahead, another crossing waited. And in mythology, crossings are rarely ordinary places, because crossing changes things. Earlier, we traveled north through Norse lands and crossed the bridge called Yalabru. Beneath winter skies, that bridge stretched over dark waters while the guardian Matka watched travelers moving between worlds. One step remained behind. Another step moved ahead. And somewhere in the middle, a traveler stood between worlds. Ancient listeners may have understood that feeling immediately. Bridges already possess a strange quality even in ordinary life. They belong partly to one place and partly to another. They exist in between. Not here, not there, somewhere else. Yet Norse storytellers were not alone in imagining bridges standing between worlds. Far away, across ancient Persia, stories told of another remarkable crossing. The Chinvat Bridge. According to ancient Persian traditions, souls traveled toward this bridge after death. There they reached a crossing unlike ordinary roads, because stories describe the bridge changing according to the traveler approaching it. For some, the bridge widened. For others, it narrowed. And for ancient listeners, perhaps that image carried unusual power. Imagine standing beneath stars before a bridge stretching into darkness. At first, it appears distant and impossible to understand. Then slowly the bridge itself begins changing. Wider, narrower, closer, farther, as though the road itself somehow recognized who stood before it. Ancient myths often transformed invisible ideas into landscapes. Choices became roads. Actions became crossings. Journeys became mountains and rivers. Stories gave shape to things difficult to see. And perhaps listeners sitting beside fires beneath Persian skies imagine travelers quietly stepping forward beneath stars while winds cross distant hills. Step by step, journey by journey, road by road, far away another mountain now emerged. Its slopes disappeared into cloud while moonlight touched forests and stone stairways climbing toward hidden places. In Japan, mountains frequently carried spiritual significance, becoming places where ordinary life and mysterious worlds seemed unusually close together. Mountain pathways wound upward through cedar forests. Mist gathered among branches while temple bells echoed across valleys below. And perhaps travelers climbing those roads noticed something. The world changed gradually. Villages became smaller. Voices became quieter. Clouds moved closer. The farther travelers climbed, the more distant ordinary life began to feel. Ancient people noticed this. Mountains rise between worlds. They stand between villages and stars, between ordinary landscapes and horizons hidden beyond sight. And perhaps that is why stories repeatedly place mysteries upon mountain paths. Because mountains already feel like thresholds. Elsewhere, stories from China sometimes imagined hidden mountains belonging partly to another world altogether. Legends spoke of distant sacred peaks and mysterious islands where mortals and extraordinary beings lived beyond ordinary reach. Some places could not simply be found. Some roads required seeking. Some journeys required patience. And perhaps that too feels familiar, because not every road appears immediately. Some paths reveal themselves slowly. Ancient listeners may have loved such stories because they transformed distant mountains into places of possibility. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, another world might wait. Somewhere beyond cloud and stone and forest, another path might begin. Across Celtic traditions, another kind of hidden place sometimes appeared. Hills, simple hills, green mounds rising quietly from the landscape. Yet stories connected certain hills and earth mounds with entrances to the other world, places associated with the Ishi and worlds existing beside the ordinary one. During daylight, perhaps such places appeared ordinary. Just hills, just grass, just earth beneath the sky. But at twilight, things sometimes felt different. Mist gathered, shadows shifted. The familiar landscape suddenly seemed unfamiliar. And perhaps people everywhere know that feeling. Even ordinary places can become mysterious after sunset. Especially roads, especially hills, especially forests. Ancient people often paid attention to those moments. A place that felt ordinary during morning light might seem transformed beneath stars. Along northern coastlines and across Alaska, stories within indigenous traditions often connected spiritual experience deeply with landscape itself. Mountains, coastlines, rivers, and distant horizons became more than scenery. The land remembered things. The land carried stories. The land itself became part of the journey. Imagine winter coastlines beneath northern lights. Mountains rise above dark water while snow reflects starlight and distant winds move through forests. Far away, yet nearby. Places like this naturally invite stories, because landscapes can create the feeling that something remains just beyond sight. Not hidden exactly, simply waiting. Perhaps that feeling existed long before words. As night deepened around our journey, mountains continued rising against distant skies, while bridges stretched across dark rivers below. Hidden roads disappeared into forests and clouds, while pathways wound toward places unseen. Travelers continued moving forward, step by step, story by story. And perhaps ancient listeners imagined themselves standing there too, beside mountain roads and silent crossings beneath stars. Because roads through mythology rarely traveled through empty space. They traveled through places, real places, places of snow and cedar and stone and mist. Places where another path always seemed to wait just beyond the next hill. And somewhere farther ahead, another journey slowly gathered beneath darkness. Because some travelers did not only cross into distant worlds, some crossed back again. The mountain roads, slowly faded behind us. Bridges disappeared into mist while hidden pathways vanished among forests and distant hills. Yet something about those journeys lingered, because roads have a way of remaining in memory long after travelers continue onward. And perhaps another question quietly waited ahead. What if some journeys did not only lead away? What if some journeys led back? Across many traditions around the world, death was not always imagined as a final separation. Ancient stories sometimes suggested that travelers crossed into another landscape and continued onward, yet at certain moments the road between worlds grew thinner. Not gone, simply closer. And during particular seasons, beneath particular skies, people believed travelers sometimes returned. Not as strangers, as family, as ancestors. Ahead, the landscape changed again. Summer replaced winter, and the cold northern roads faded into softer evenings filled with lanterns and distant fires. Across villages and coastlines, small lights began appearing in darkness. One by one, window by window, lantern by lantern, because across many cultures, light became a way of welcoming travelers home. Earlier in our journey, we visited Japan and stood beside the Sanzu River beneath lantern light and mountain shadows. But Japanese traditions also imagined another beautiful idea connected with returning travelers. During observances associated with Obon, families welcomed ancestral spirits through remembrance, gatherings, and lights that guided travelers homeward. Lanterns glowed beside homes and rivers while communities gathered beneath summer skies. Imagine the scene for a moment. Warm evening air moves through distant trees. Families gather quietly together while mountains darken beneath sunset. Nearby lanterns begin appearing one after another, and eventually small lights drift across water beneath stars. Not bright lights, gentle lights, traveling lights. Even now it feels dreamlike. Perhaps ancient listeners standing beside rivers watched lanterns floating into darkness and imagined travelers quietly following them home. Because people often use light for journeys. Sailors search for lighthouse beams. Travelers look toward campfires. Villages place lights beside roads. A single light can transform darkness. And perhaps that is why lights appear again and again beside stories of returning souls. Far away beneath enormous African skies, another image appeared. Villages gathered beneath stars while fires glowed softly against darkness, and stories traveled between generations. Ancestors remained close, not always visible, not always distant, present. Across traditions among the Yoruba people, relationships between the living and ancestors often remained ongoing and active. Departed family members were not always imagined as gone in the sense of disappearance. Connections continued, guidance continued, memory continued. And perhaps listeners long ago understood this naturally. Because people continue speaking of those they love long after they are gone. Stories continue. Advice continues. Familiar sayings and memories quietly remain. Perhaps ancestors never entirely leave. They simply travel differently. Elsewhere among traditions connected with the Akan people, ancestors also remained important presences connected with family and continuity across generations. Again, the pattern appears. Journeys continue, connections continue, roads continue, and perhaps that repeating rhythm tells us something important. Many stories refuse to imagine separation as permanent. Instead, they imagined roads remaining open. Far north, beneath skies filled with winter stars, another landscape slowly emerged. Coastlines stretched beneath moonlight while mountains stood beside dark waters and distant lights reflected upon snow. The northern world returned. Along Alaska's coastlines and across landscapes where darkness stretches long into winter, many indigenous traditions spoke about worlds woven closely beside the ordinary one. Mountains, rivers, animals, coastlines, and dreams often carried meaning beyond scenery itself. The landscape participated. The landscape remembered. The landscape spoke. Across traditions among the Yupik people and other northern cultures, stories sometimes describe dreams and spiritual experiences not merely as imagination, but as places where unseen connections could emerge. Dreams could become meetings. Dreams could become journeys. Dreams could become roads. And perhaps anyone who has awakened from an unusually vivid dream understands this feeling. Sometimes a dream feels different. Not strange exactly, significant, as though something traveled beside it. Ancient people often treated such moments carefully. Imagine winter coastlines beneath northern lights. Snow reflects starlight while distant mountains rise above dark waters and ravens move quietly across the horizon. Far away, yet nearby. The world itself can sometimes feel that way, and perhaps people living close beside enormous landscapes naturally sense mysteries differently. When mountains remain nearby for generations and stars move overhead across countless winters, landscapes stop feeling like scenery. Places become companions. Places become memory. Places become story. Elsewhere, another returning traveler quietly appeared. Fire. Throughout many traditions, fire became associated with remembrance and welcome. Campfires gathered people together. Hearth fires glowed beside homes. Candles and lanterns illuminated darkness. Because fire creates gathering, fire creates orientation. Fire says something very simple. Someone is here. Someone waits. Perhaps that is why fires so often appear in stories of return, because every traveler understands the comfort of seeing light after a long journey. Every traveler understands home appearing in the distance. And perhaps ancient listeners sitting beside evening fires understood these stories not as distant myths, but as familiar feelings. The road has been long. The night has been long. And somewhere ahead, a light appears. As darkness deepened around our journey, lanterns continued drifting across rivers while distant fires glowed beneath stars. Northern mountains reflected moonlight while coastlines stretched quietly into the horizon. Somewhere travelers returned. Somewhere families remembered. Somewhere roads between worlds seemed thinner than before. Because across mythology and memory and landscape separated by oceans and generations, one gentle idea appeared again and again. Some journeys do not only carry people away. Sometimes journeys bring them home. And somewhere farther ahead, another story quietly waited. Because not every traveler returns gently. Some return carrying mysteries from the road beyond. The strange journeys slowly faded behind us. The music of Orpheus disappeared into distant valleys while mountain roads and dream paths softened beneath gathering night. Travelers who crossed rivers and climbed impossible roads gradually vanished into darkness, and for a while the journey became quiet once more. Not empty, simply quiet. Because after so many roads and rivers and crossings, another question slowly waited ahead. Why do people everywhere imagine the soul's journey at all? Across deserts and forests, coastlines and mountains, people separated by oceans and thousands of years repeatedly imagined remarkably similar ideas. They imagined travelers continuing onward. They imagined roads extending beyond ordinary sight. Again and again, familiar images appeared. Journeys, crossings, guides, returnings. And perhaps what feels most remarkable is not that people imagine these things. Perhaps it is how often they imagine them together. Far away beneath Egyptian skies, people once watched the sun disappear each evening beyond the western horizon. Night arrived, darkness crossed the land, and yet every morning the sun returned once again. Ancient Egyptians imagined a story hidden inside that rhythm. Each evening the god Ra entered his celestial boat and traveled through darkness itself. Through 12 regions and 12 gates the journey continued while dangers waited in unseen places. Yet every dawn he returned. Every morning light crossed the Nile once more. And perhaps listeners standing beside riverbanks thousands of years ago saw more than sunrise. Perhaps they saw proof, because if the sun could journey through darkness and return, perhaps travelers could too. Stories often begin with ordinary things people see every day. Elsewhere beneath Greek skies, people stood beside rivers and coastlines where water quietly separated one place from another. Travelers crossed rivers continually in ordinary life. Boats arrived and departed while distant shores disappeared beneath mist. Ancient storytellers transformed familiar experiences into larger journeys. Sharon waited beside shadowed waters. Coins accompanied travelers. Roads continued beyond sight. And perhaps the image felt believable because people already understood crossings. Everyone has stood on one shore while looking toward another. Everyone understands wondering what waits on the far side. Far north beneath winter skies, another story quietly appeared. People watched snow-covered roads. Familiar landscapes transformed beneath darkness while northern lights drifted overhead. Winter itself changed ordinary places into unfamiliar places. Ancient stories from Norse traditions imagined travelers crossing bridges and following roads between worlds. Yalabur stretched ahead. Hell waited beyond. And perhaps listeners gathered beside fires while storms crossed dark mountains and thought something simple. Journeys through winter require preparation. Journeys through mystery probably do too. Stories often borrow from ordinary life. Mountains become larger. Roads become stranger. Journeys become myth. Far away in Persia, travelers once crossed long roads stretching beneath enormous skies and distant mountains. Ancient Zoroastrian traditions imagined another crossing after life ended. The Chinvat Bridge. We crossed it earlier in our journey, but perhaps now it feels different. Imagine standing before a bridge suspended ahead in darkness. Winds move quietly through distant hills while stars stretch overhead. The bridge itself slowly changes as a traveler approaches. For some it widens, for others it narrows, Ancient listeners may have understood the deeper meaning immediately, because life itself often feels that way. Some roads become easier. Some roads become difficult. Some journeys feel shaped by choices made long before travelers reach them. Stories transformed invisible ideas into landscapes. Roads became memory. Bridges became choices. Journeys became life itself. Across Alaska and northern landscapes, stories among indigenous traditions often connected journeys with mountains, animals, coastlines, and dreams. Roads did not always lead somewhere distant. Sometimes another world existed beside this one. Nearby, just beyond sight. Imagine standing beside winter coastlines while green northern lights drift overhead and mountains rise beyond dark waters. Imagine ravens crossing snowy horizons while silence stretches across enormous landscapes. Places like this already feel mysterious. Perhaps stories naturally grow there, because landscapes sometimes feel larger than explanation. And perhaps people living close beside mountains and forests and rivers notice something important. Nature itself never stops moving. Rivers continue flowing. Stars continue traveling. Birds disappear and return. Winter leaves. Spring arrives. Movement exists everywhere. Perhaps that is why so many cultures imagine souls moving onward instead of stopping entirely. Because endings sound final. Roads do not. Roads bend. Roads disappear briefly beyond hills before appearing once again farther ahead. And perhaps after traveling through all these stories tonight, another thought quietly begins emerging. Maybe people imagine roads for souls because human life already resembles one. Journeys begin unexpectedly. Companions appear and disappear. Mountains rise while rivers wait ahead. Travelers change. Stories change. Everything changes. And still the road continues. As darkness deepened around our final journey, mountains softened beneath moonlight while rivers reflected stars overhead. Lanterns drifted quietly upon distant waters while roads disappeared into forests and horizons. Somewhere beneath winter skies, travelers crossed hidden bridges. Somewhere beneath summer stars, lanterns still floated upon rivers. Somewhere beneath northern lights, roads continued stretching beyond sight. Because stories continue, journeys continue, and perhaps somewhere, in every place where people once gathered beside fires and looked upward into darkness, ancient listeners quietly imagine one final thought. No traveler walks entirely alone. The roads have grown quieter now. The rivers have become still while distant mountains soften beneath the last hours of night. Lanterns drift farther away, and one by one the landscapes of our journey slowly disappear into darkness. The Nile fades beneath stars. Northern bridges disappear into winter mist. Temple bells become distant echoes. The lanterns beside the Sanzu River grow smaller. And overhead, celestial roads continue stretching across the night sky. For a while, we traveled together across worlds imagined by countless generations. We crossed rivers beneath moonlight and followed roads hidden beyond mountains and forests. We wandered beside ferrymen and guardians, crossed bridges suspended over darkness, and followed ancient travelers moving toward horizons just beyond sight. And perhaps after so many stories, one thought quietly remains. Across nearly every place we visited tonight, people imagined that the soul did not simply stop. It journeyed. Ancient Egyptians watched the sun disappear each evening and imagined RA traveling through darkness before dawn returned once more. Greek storytellers stood beside rivers and imagined shadowed crossings beyond ordinary sight. Northern travelers followed roads beneath winter skies, while mountain paths climbed into cloud and mystery. Lanterns floated upon rivers in Japan, while celestial roads stretched above the world itself. Different landscapes, different people, different stories, yet often the same quiet hope. That perhaps endings are not always endings. That perhaps roads continue beyond places we cannot yet see. And perhaps that idea has always felt familiar because human life itself already resembles a journey. Roads appear unexpectedly. Travelers arrive and disappear. Companions walk beside us for a while before continuing onward along paths of their own. Mountains rise. Rivers wait. Stories continue. And throughout tonight's journey, another idea quietly followed us from place to place. No traveler walks entirely alone. Not beside Egyptian waters beneath stars. Not crossing rivers hidden in Greek mist. Not beneath northern lights. Not beside lanterns drifting across summer rivers. Again and again, stories imagined companions waiting nearby. Guides appeared beside roads. Ancestors remained close. Birds crossed skies. Travelers found companions where darkness once seemed uncertain. Perhaps ancient people understood something gentle. Long journeys feel different when someone walks beside you. Even now, that idea feels familiar. Because everyone remembers roads that seemed shorter because of good company. Everyone remembers campfires, distant lights, or familiar voices appearing at exactly the right moment. Travel changes. Journeys change. Companions matter. And now our own road tonight slowly approaches its final horizon. The campfire burns lower. Stars continue their patient movement overhead. Mountains rest beneath moonlight while rivers carry reflections across dark water. Somewhere distant, a boat still moves quietly through Egyptian night waters. Somewhere a ferryman still waits beside shadowed shores while northern winds continue crossing forests beneath winter stars. Somewhere lanterns still drift slowly across rivers. Somewhere roads still disappear beyond hills. Because stories never entirely sleep. They simply wait. And perhaps that is why people continue returning to mythology after thousands of years. Ancient stories still travel. Ancient questions still travel too. People still wonder what waits beyond horizons. People still stand beneath stars. People still gather beside fires and ask questions larger than themselves. Perhaps we always will. And perhaps somewhere tonight, beneath winter skies or summer skies, beside oceans or forests or distant mountains, someone is looking upward and wondering the same things ancient listeners once wondered. Who traveled there before? What roads continue beyond sight? What journeys wait ahead? For now, the roads grow quiet. The stars remain overhead while distant landscapes slowly disappear beneath the horizon of sleep and story. Thank you for traveling with us tonight on the Sleepy Legends channel. And if tonight's journey through myths, mysteries, and forgotten roads became part of your evening, We hope you will return and join us beside the campfire once again. Until our paths cross again, beneath stars and stories and distant horizons, may your roads be gentle and your night be filled with wonder. The journey continues.